Welcome to Dog Training Bytes. The show where canine professionals share their key takeaways, big aha moments, and hardest lessons learned from working with dogs. I'm Mattison, certified dog trainer and behavior consultant, and dogs are my life. Every day I get to coach guardians and other trainers into a deeper understanding of canine behavior. But let's face it, sometimes dog training really bites. And that's okay, because when it does, we learn a lot. This podcast is all about sharing the lessons learned from experience, because the stories of when it got tough or when we made a mistake, that's when we learn the lessons worth learning. And it's time we share those with the world. I'll be talking to dog trainers and other pet professionals about times that working with dogs, well, bit. Not literally. Maybe literally. What's most important here on this show, what did they walk away with? What did they learn? How did it shape their approach today? Welcome to Dog Training Bytes, the show where pet professionals share personal lessons that you won't find in any textbook. Today, we have someone I've been lucky enough to get to know over the last year or so through the power of social media, Amelia Steele. Amelia is an experienced dog trainer and behavior consultant who also creates free and highly accessible training content for guardians all over the world. She specializes in addressing and preventing behaviors such as reactivity, aggression, and anxiety. Amelia encourages her audience and clients to take a step back and look at the larger picture of canine welfare to find the root of a behavior. But most importantly, she strives to make training easy and fun for everyone involved. Hi, Amelia. It is so nice to have you here today for our little story corner.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So I think the first thing I want to know about, and I only know a little bit about this, is just to hear a little bit more about the dogs in your life. I know you have two at the moment.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so I have two dogs. I have Cassius, who's my older dog. He's going to be 6 this year, which is just wild to me because it literally feels like yesterday since I got him.
Oh,
He's a German Shepherd, and he is the most interesting dog I've ever worked with. He's the dog that definitely inspired me to become a dog trainer.
the dog that started it all.
Yeah, definitely. And then I have Indy, who is my golden retriever, and he is 2.5. They're very interesting dogs because they couldn't be more different as dogs.
Right.
Working with both of them has been such an interesting experience because I think I've learned totally different things from both of them.
What is their dynamic like together?
They absolutely love each other. So Cassius has always been really great with dogs, and which I think is so funny because being a German Shepherd, people are always like, oh, what's he like with other dogs? How will he respond to a second dog? But
Yeah.
I had so much faith in him that he would be great, and he was. And so the second we brought Indy home, it was like we'd brought him a puppy. Honestly, I've never seen anything
Thanks,
like
Mom. You
it.
got me a puppy.
Honestly, he just sort of like really took to him, and they just love each other. And I genuinely think sometimes Cassius pretends that he's not interested in Indy, like when they're out and if there's other stuff going on, he's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're my uncool younger brother kind of vibe.
Right.
But in the sort of like moments that count, you can really tell that they really love each other, and it's so nice to see. And yeah, there's never really been any issues between the two of them. They just love each other.
That's amazing. What a nice transition to have had, because you're right, it can go, and we've seen it go not that smoothly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it definitely helped that he was a puppy because I think bringing an older dog might have been a much harder a transition. Not that he's ever disliked other dogs, but I think it's always trickier to get two adult dogs to like each other,
You have a
right?
lot more ability to influence, the behaviors and the manners that they're going to have early on with the puppy.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Indy is definitely the more boisterous one out of the two, even though he's much
Mhm.
smaller. And I think that dynamic works nicely because if it was the other way around, it would have
Right.
been a lot harder. But because Indy
Kind of
was so,
levels the playing field.
yeah, definitely. And because Indy was so small as a puppy, Cassius learned really early on, oh, if I'm too rough or if I yank this toy too hard, that's game over and I don't get to play with you. So he learned to be gentle, but it's to the point now where he still lets him win every game. Like he
Oh,
realized that the
what
playing
a
field.
good older brother.
No, it's very sweet. They like to play a game where they're both holding a toy, and Indy will pull Cassius to the other side of the room with the toy, and then Cassius stands up, pulls him back, and then they just repeat that game. It is so funny and it's so cute.
That's adorable. I love that. Oh my
It
gosh.
really is.
Okay, Amelia, what is the story that you brought for us today? I'm excited to hear this one.
Yeah, so it's a story about, I guess, trusting in yourself and the experiences that you've built because
Oh, I love that.
yeah, I was thinking about it because I've worked with so many behavioral cases, and I think you definitely take something from every single dog that you work with. But I think these dogs impacted me particularly a lot because of the amount that I worked with them. So this was a day training client that I had. So I would pick the dogs up twice a week. We would go out for training. So it was a really good experience for me, I think, because a lot of it was being hands-on, me doing the training rather
Yeah.
than necessarily coaching the clients. They were two smaller dogs, so two Maltese. They were litter mates and they had been really unwell as puppies. So as soon as they came home, they got Giardia,
Yeah.
and that basically put them both in the hospital, puppy hospital, and they basically missed their entire socialization
Right.
phase. So they
Yeah.
both had extreme reactivity. And when I first started working with them, they couldn't go for a walk. They would immediately leave their apartment block and freeze and shake, and they hated the
Oh
walk.
gosh.
So we knew it would be a long process, which is why we agreed on day training, because the clients they ran their own business, and they were traveling all over the world. So a lot of the time they were having like dog nannies come in to look after the dogs. So
They
I
needed
would take
more consistency.
yeah, and I think they just needed that sort of help getting started because I
Hmm.
think once we started seeing that progress, it was much easier to hand over to them and say, here's what you continue the
Yeah.
training. And so we always knew that it would be a long process, and we knew that it would take time and a lot of patience. And we got to a point where they were brilliant. And I think a really hard transition for a lot of reactivity cases is getting from the point where dogs, you can walk past dogs to then the interactions. And I
Hmm.
think the bit that people get stuck on a lot of the time. And this was a really interesting case because the area that these guys lived in was city centre. As soon as you walked out the door, there was loads of dogs, loads of things,
Okay. Yeah.
loads of stuff going
It's
on. So
tough. It's tough when you have an environment like that, but you can't just turn to a client and say, well, you need to pick up and move your whole life. That's not really a reasonable thing most of the time.
yeah, exactly. And it was a sort of really interesting moment, I think, that made me realize like at some point you have to trust in your own training because
Hmm.
I remember taking them out one day and we were getting to the point where they could quite comfortably walk past other dogs. We weren't getting the reactions. And a dog came up behind us out of nowhere. And in my moment of sort of like panic of like, we've not been in this situation before, this dog was already there. And the dogs that I were with were great. They stopped, they sniffed. You do what you do, right? I'm gonna keep the lead really loose. I calmly
Yep.
explained to the other person, hey, these guys can be reactive. And there was no reaction. There was nothing. There was just sniffing, a really nice interaction, and then they moved on. And it was in that moment that I kind of realized that at some point you have to trust in your training because we knew
Hmm.
that okay, we've staged greetings, we've done parallel walks, we've done all the right things. But when those moments happen, I guess, as you would say, in the wild,
Yeah.
it can be you almost have a hangover on how dogs used to be. So I think people say a lot of the time, like train the dog in front of you. But I think that even goes for when your training's gone well, because sometimes you have to take a step back and look at the progress that you've made and realize, like, hey, it's all there. And that's something I've really tried to encourage and instill in the clients that I have to this day, because still I'll work with dogs where we're getting them to a certain point, but people have such a hangover about how the dog used to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are holding the dog back from progressing. So
Hmm.
I think that really goes for every stage of training, like train the dog in front of you even when your dog is doing really well and thriving with that training. So that's the story that I really wanted to bring to the table today.
Yeah, I think there's so much in there. I think there's, like you said, trusting in yourself, trusting in your own abilities, and that is something that can translate over to like our experience as trainers in feeling that of, okay, I'm just going to trust my abilities to navigate through this moment. I think that also sparks the conversation of, well, how can we get guardians and owners to that point? How can we get them to feel that level of confidence? Because we have these protocols that we practice and practice and practice and practice. In the absence of these moments, it can be hard to remember to actually do it in that
Yeah.
moment, right? So I think you're right. It's about building our confidence in that moment, trusting our handling abilities, trusting that we've practiced for this, right? So like it's time to just do it, as opposed to falling back into our old patterns of tensing, of restricting, of controlling, of doing all these things that we maybe used to do that weren't working. So I think that there is just, oh my gosh, there's so much there. What are the what are the types of thoughts or the thought patterns that like we as humans, so this could be you as the trainer or maybe a guardian, can get stuck in and can hold you back? Because I've had this happen, same thing in particular with client dogs I've been working with for a really long time, like months and months and months and months, where we're taking 1%, like 1% steps. And all of a sudden we've made this progress and we don't realize that if things have actually hit a point where they're exponential, where we can be making 2 or 3% progress each day, but we're still stuck in this like micro goals. So I guess I'm curious, yeah, like what other thoughts do you think become limiting for us or the owners?
I think a really good example of this is actually something that happened with me and my dog. So, Indy, my golden retriever, last year got attacked in the park, and we had that period of time was
I didn't
just,
know that. Oh,
yeah, and we actually had it happen to us twice. So, one
oh my
time,
gosh. We
I
got
mean,
to go to a new park.
our area is just you there. I've stopped walking my dogs in our local area now because I think there's too many dogs for the number of people and the number of accessible walking areas.
Mm-hmm.
And the leash laws here are basically non-existent. So everywhere
Right.
is off leash, which makes
Oh
things
my
difficult.
gosh. Yeah.
We had one instance where a dog had rushed us and started. Actually, the dog was going for my German Shepherd, and he doesn't bat an eyelid when that happens. But I'm thinking in this moment, like, this guy can't get control of his dog. Like, if my dog fights back, I'm going to look like the bad one. So I pulled him behind me, and this dog just ended up biting me. And then my golden retriever found the whole thing really stressful and was very stressed afterwards at
Yeah.
home, panting, really couldn't settle. And then we'd had it again in a different park where a German
Oh
Shepherd
no.
lead reactive had come over and just started going for both the dogs, which wasn't very pleasant.
No, not so much.
So coming out of that situation, I was so anxious myself about how is he going to feel about dogs now, because
Yeah.
this is two different situations. I'm really worried that he's going to be nervous. And so me being extra cautious, I took him out for training, but I really wanted to do everything right. So I sort of gave him a break, then did gradual exposure, met up for play dates, all those
Yeah.
things. But I was still every walk finding myself getting super anxious. I was
Yeah.
avoiding certain places. I was just so worried because I was like, especially being a professional, you think, well, if my dog reacts badly, that could make me look bad as a professional. It could impact my
Yeah.
reputation, because even though it might not be his fault or he might not have started it, you never know whether someone's going to turn around and be like, hey, your dog did XYZ.
Yeah.
Actually, when we took a step back from that, we realized that he was fine. He was actually fine. Like, he
Yeah.
just quite happy staying high, quite happy playing with dogs if he wanted to. And everything was me. I was the one creating the anxiety
We
around
can
that.
project by accident.
Yeah, definitely. So there was a couple of things that I think helped. I mean, I've done my own therapy, so I think learning from that has been great, and just
Yeah.
learning actually to take a step back. And one of the things I learned in that was to ask yourself questions like, am I making assumptions about this situation? Am I catastrophizing? Is the anxiety that I have, is that a reality, or am I creating a scenario that doesn't really
Right.
exist? So I think taking a step back from that and really looking at my own behavior, and it's okay to be anxious. It's a human response, but I think learning how to make sure that's not then translating through to the dogs is important. So I would do a lot around setting the walk up to be successful for me as well. So
Yeah.
where can we go where I can just switch off and enjoy the walk? And maybe that means we just do street walks for a little bit. Maybe that means I go and walk with my friends who have dogs that we know, so that I'm not worrying about it. Or maybe we
Yeah.
book a field. And doing those things, to just really learn to enjoy the walks again really
It's giving
help.
you some positive reinforcement.
Exactly exactly. So sometimes it's sort of like taking a step out of the experience that you're in and reflecting back on that. And, the same goes for these behavioral cases. So if we're working, let's say, with a client that has a reactive dog, but actually we're seeing, well, they're not so reactive anymore and they can go out and do these walks and enjoy themselves and have this freedom. I normally get people to sit down, and sometimes I find it helpful to get people to journal, because
Mm-hmm.
we get them to sit down and reflect on the walk and, okay, what does a reaction look like these days? How often are the reactions happening? Like, what is the worst case scenario? When people sit down and write it and put it
Yeah,
into writing, they can actually see, like, okay, this is the reality of my situation right now, rather than sort of projecting a reality into the situation that doesn't exist. So I find that really helps from a client perspective. And yeah, like
that's
I said,
really interesting. Journaling. I've never thought of that. I'm a very like numbers and data person. So I ask my clients for frequency and intensity behavior charts to fill them out. So that could be, this is, I guess, the same thing, but in like a qualitative versus a quantitative, right? But you could even use that, whether it's a previous journal or old data, to show them, look at how things have changed. The
yeah,
intensity used to be here, the frequency used to be here. It used to take this much time to recover. And now look at how much different things are. I think that can be really game changing, to have that type of exercise on the front end of a program and then have these sort of check-ins throughout to see and be able to celebrate those wins, because they don't feel big when you're in that 1% improvement. But when you reflect on it, it can feel really freaking good.
that's the thing. And I think sometimes you almost get the opposite problem as well, where because you're with the dog every single day and you're not necessarily seeing that big change, people feel like, oh, well, I've not made any progress. And then when you actually reflect on
Absolutely.
it, you're like, wow, look how different things are. So it's definitely an exercise I love doing with my clients. And I do online coaching, so it's a lot of it's done through WhatsApp. So it's something we get people to do for themselves and do for the chat as well. But I find it helps, because another issue that I think a lot of people have is different rates of progress with different people within the household. So I get people to track their individual progress, because I think it's
Mm,
really easy for people to go, well, the dog's really well behaved for you, but they're not good for me. But then actually,
right.
compared to where we were at a month ago, there's a huge difference with that individual. So I find it just a really helpful exercise overall to help with all of those things, like tracking and measuring progress, but also really looking at the reality of the current situation rather than getting stuck in those hangovers of what used to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't thought about, splitting that information up into individual handlers within the family unit. I love that, because you're right. I think there can be a lot of discrepancies even within a household, and that can be really frustrating or challenging. And you certainly don't want to take away from the feelings that the family member that's having a ton of progress or maybe is farther ahead is feeling, because that's going to encourage them to keep with their progress. But yeah, just giving everybody their own path and their own milestones to success.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's so common within households as well, or you get it quite a lot where a dog might have a different dynamic with like a male versus female member of the household.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think sometimes people struggle with that because they think, what am I doing wrong? But
Hmm.
sometimes when we step out of that and look at, okay, but this is where we were at a month ago and this is where we're at now, it can be huge progress, but that individual person is comparing their progress with where their partner is at and they're going, but I want to be there. So I think
But that's
sometimes,
not your journey. That's exactly. Yeah.
so I think so much of it is, like I say, really, I guess, taking a lesson from the dogs and looking at what's going on in this moment rather
Hmm.
than, where do I want to be all the time, or where was I 6 months ago and am I still there? So I think it's definitely a useful exercise to step out of that.
I could not agree more. Okay, Amelia, is there anything else you would like the listeners and the dog people out there to know about you, or what you do, or how they can work with you?
Yeah, so basically, so I specialize mostly in problem behaviors and sort of general pet dog training. So pulling on the lead, reactivity is a big one that I deal with all the time, resource guarding, separation anxiety, those types of behaviors. And then obviously your general stuff as well. So settling in the house, basic manners, all that lovely stuff. And at the moment, I'm doing that all online. So I do have a one-to-one program. It is currently full, but I also offer support and advice through my training hub, which is basically a community-based platform with loads of hosted content, so you can work through at your own pace. But like I said, there's also a huge community element. So we all like to support each other. You get support from me. We do live workshops. So it's really designed to be a sort of entire training package that is accessible and affordable.
You can connect with Amelia on Instagram at Amelia the Dog Trainer, and you can find more information on her training and a link to her website in the show notes. Thanks for joining us in the world of dog training bites, where every challenge brings a lesson worth sinking our teeth into. See you next time. Dog Training Bites was created, produced, and edited by Mattison Skoog-Simpson. You can connect with me on Instagram at Dog Training Bytes, that's BYTES, and at Freed by Training. For information on today's guest and resources for help with your dog or dog training education, visit www.dogtrainingbytes.stream. Looking for more? Listen to my other show, Unpacked, a clinical dog training podcast co-hosted by Sailor Jerry the Dog Trainer and produced by Straight Up Dog Talk, LLC.